Douglas Pritchard, again, a researcher working in Cyprus at the Cyprus University of Technology, the Mnemosyne Era Chair project. And Douglas is going to present us or make it clear to us if, yeah, the 3D data acquisition is all about geometry or not. Douglas, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Douglas is at the moment due to the pandemic in Canada, so we are now linked to Canada. Douglas, floor is yours.
Okay. You can hear me, and can you see the screen?
Crystal clear, both image.
Okay. Well, as mentioned, I'm Douglas Pritchard. I'm a senior research fellow at the Digital Heritage Research Lab at the Cyprus University of Technology. And my area of research interest deals with data acquisition and also the development of smart cities for heritage and the digital twin. So the presentation that I'm going to give to you today deals with 3D data acquisition, and as Marinos mentioned, is geometry enough? And what I'm doing is using the Cologne Cathedral project that I worked on previously as the foundation of that of my presentation. So this was a project that was done a few years back with the Fresenius University of Applied Sciences in Cologne, Germany, Harriet Watt University out of Edinburgh, the Dome, the Cologne Cathedral administration, and also I would like to recognize the support of Zoller and Froelich, who assisted with the project and provided some fantastic equipment. So as you would know, Cologne is on the western side of Germany, a really magnificent city, and in the center of it is the Cologne Cathedral, probably one of the most important buildings in Christianity, and also a significant structure for the people of Germany. It's a remarkable building in that it dates back as far as 1248, but only completed in 1880. So there's elements of the building that are very old, and then there's other elements like the towers, which are relatively new. And that gives the cathedral a certain amount of flexibility in terms of the maintenance and conservation of the building. But also it poses a number of challenges in terms of the age of the structure in particular areas. One thing I think is quite interesting. During World War II, the cathedral made a tremendous effort to protect itself from damage. It was hit 16 times by aerial bombing, unfortunately. But one thing that I think is quite interesting is this used to exist in the cathedral, and this is basically where they kept their precious objects like the stained glass or icons and other metalwork. And to a certain extent, this project is the digital version of that. The idea is that it is about digital preservation, capturing the building at its current time. And what is interesting is that this project, all of the scanning was done just before the unfortunate fire of Notre Dame. So, you know, and Notre Dame, I think, really proved the value of precision documentation. There was a number of smaller projects that were done there. There was Andrew Talon's project. He's a professor, or was a professor at Vassar University, who as a personal project went into Notre Dame and scanned. And then you had companies like Ubisoft, who were developing a video game, also had a fantastic digital record. So all that information has gone to help with the rebuilding of Notre Dame. And I think this is an extremely important consideration for all heritage projects. Laser scanning, I've been involved with for 20 years. It is certainly no longer new, but comprehensive laser scanning, I think, is important and should occur with all significant heritage structures as best as possible. So just looking at when you're at the cathedral and walking around the cathedral, you certainly see issues from the past. This is just a surface issue, but there are some structural shifts in the building due to damage. But there's also contemporary issues that are a challenge. There's some catastrophic ones, like say finding a bomb in the river just in front of you. But there's other things that are a concern. So the building is changing daily and not necessarily in a good way. The building now has to deal with excessive air pollution. There are seismic concerns due to the adjacent rail station and relatively recent engineering works. And then the bigger issue of things like global warming and the shifting weather patterns. The winds are a lot stronger there. The building is quite significant. And combining that with acid rain, you run into problems like accelerated stone degradation. The big one is the Cologne Cathedral receives 6 million visitors per year, and that certainly has an impact on the site. As an important pilgrimage site, the carbon emitted from the millions of votive candles alone will affect surfaces in the ceiling and the paintings. Vandalism is a problem. Destruction of specific elements within the building become a problem. Theft is an issue. So the documentation of a building, and this is not new really to a conference like this, but comprehensive documentation I think is very important, because you can't really plan for these kind of events. So this is the cathedral, as many of you know. The train station there is on to the left. It is constantly under renovation, which is interesting. They have a permanent team of 300 contractors working on everything from stonemasonry to wood and metalwork. If you ever have the pleasure of visiting the cathedral, I would strongly suggest two things: that you go and take a tour from the roof, because you get a spectacular view. It's entirely safe. But also, if you have the opportunity to go and see how the artisans are working on the building at their workshop, it's brilliant. And the important connection between this project and the work that we're doing at the lab is that when you look at this building, it's a Gothic cathedral, but every piece of stone, every sculpture has a story. The stone can have a story with regards to when it was constructed. The story could be its condition. Whereas with other elements on a Gothic cathedral, you have the sculptures that have their individual stories, not just the narrative of a particular object, but then also you have the story of its condition. So this building is under constant change, and that story can be extremely helpful for the maintenance and conservation of the building. The big thing I would have to say with this project, most certainly, is the imposition of tourism. Some of it is very positive, some of it can be very negative. This is a concern, obviously, for this cathedral and all other cathedrals. How do you address that? But the project essentially began as a labor of love between the University of Fresnius and the cathedral and myself. It was to see initially how far we can go in the recording process, taking the scanner and moving it around. And the interesting thing about this project is that it really began with just myself and the logistical support from the University of Fresnius. So we were able to get quite a bit of work done with a very small focused team. But then we received additional support from Zola and Froelich. I should say that Dr. Froelich is passionate about this building, so he was very kind and provided us with extra equipment. So we were able to move through the building with a series of laser scanners. We were using the ZNF 5010C, the 5010X, and towards the end of the project, we actually had a 5016. So initially the project began by recording the exterior of the building. So that's circling the entire structure at ground level with the scanners and using the highest resolution possible on the scanners in addition to HDR imagery. So we're capturing the point data as well as the HDR data. And we went everywhere. And again, you know, we were very fortunate. I was able to go into any room necessary to do the scanning. And you could see that in every room, there's going to be a story. This is their storage area for the sculptures. Some of them have been removed from the facade because they are in poor condition. Others that are there are ones that are going to be used for replacement purposes. So we went in there and scanned the space, but also did high resolution scans as well. What is particularly interesting, and this is what happened just before the Notre Dame fire, being able to explore or document the areas throughout the building. So this is quite unique, and it was referenced at an event that I was at in Rome, dealing with the fire at Notre Dame, explaining the differences between various cathedrals. And Notre Dame, as you know, has a wood structure ceiling. During the war or after the war, the Cologne Cathedral removed their ceiling because it was so damaged and replaced it with steel. But the vaults that you see there are a seal, essentially. And this is what happened at Notre Dame. They act as a seal between the below area and the roof area. And in the case of Cologne, all the steel work then means they have more space to work. Just to give a sense of the size and the structure, a massive project. So when you start scanning from below and you look up, you realize it's a really big building. And the idea with the work was to take the scanner absolutely everywhere, including the two towers, which was done. This is the view from one of the towers. What was done initially on this project, and this is some of the work that I've done previously, is using the scanner in a different way, certainly positioning it on a tripod and doing the scanning, but then also extending the scanner out on a boom and inverting it downwards so that you pick up data like you would see here. And just describing the amount of work that was done, the amount of scans with the scanners. So one thing I'd have to say that I was very fortunate with the Cologne project is the parapets. The parapets surround the building at various levels. So that really helped with the documentation project. Just to give a sense from the scanning positions, also moving around the area, looking at the entire World Heritage Precinct, that was very important. So what you don't see here is the scans that were of the area down well into the train station plaza, but then on the other side where the administration offices are for the Dome, as well as the other museum areas. So the idea was to be as comprehensive as possible. And that was actually to future-proof because at that time there was a discussion of changing the plaza. One thing that was nice, Fresenius University really, they are a professional kind of trade school type of university. They have a media program and they use the scanning as an opportunity to showcase student work, but also engage the students in the project. So they did all this amazing presentation material, giving it out to the public, explaining what the work has been done, which I think we tend to forget as academics, that there is a public side to the work and people are genuinely interested when they see a team of people climbing up towers and they want to know what's going on. I'm just going to rush through these slides. So basically to show that the work was done on the exterior and interior. All the work had to be done very, very carefully. You know, we're dealing with metal tripods and you don't want to scratch the floor in any way. So using rollers, And then also being very, very efficient with the time while on site, using 2 scanners instead of 1 scanner, overlapping, being careful about leaving it in public areas, dodging the public and tourists. People that like to look into the scanners is always a fun thing. They try to figure out how it's working. That you try to tend to avoid. With the 5010C and with the 5016, they have a light that you can use, which was fantastic inside the cathedral. The HDR imagery, again, very important. One thing I would say in terms of the post-processing, as I'm showing you around, the data was linked to an existing survey control. So all that data was brought into a very strong network. So error control was a big deal, as was the survey report. The data was then post-processed in a number of formats for the cathedral. The important ones being JPEG for images and E57 just to create more open data. We also, through Zoller and Froelich, had access to a thermal camera. So we applied that data. So I would say this is a huge project, data acquisition project, and the data that was acquired was not dumb, but it's not smart data. So the stage after that is the smarter processing purpose. But you could have great data, but to do a project like this, I feel that you really need comprehensive data, which means that you're climbing over every space in the building and trying to get the most perfect vantage point. Some photogrammetry was done, not a lot. We had access to a drone and permission, but for only a short period of time from the police. So we did an overview of the building. We did one of the towers, but photogrammetry wasn't used on the towers, which is one thing that I regret. I do think in terms of the data processing side, I would have to say that the combination of scan data, 360-degree imagery, but also photogrammetry is a fantastic method of generating a dimensionally precise model, but also visually precise. Also pushing the technology in ways that can be a bit scary at times. This is a scanning tripod that you use to scan sewers, where you lower a scanner down into the sewer system. In this situation, we used it from the keystones at the cathedral, lowering it through. It was a little stressful lowering a system like that in a World Heritage Site, but when you're down below looking up, it really didn't look like a big deal, but it gave us fantastic data. And then I'm just going to move a little quickly because I want to finish up moving the scanner onto the towers, including climbing the towers. That was an important component, because being able to scan the North Tower looking at the South Tower and the South Tower looking at the North Tower, that was an important component of the project. And just wrapping up, the data is now entirely registered. So all the interior and exterior scan data has been brought together. Being able to, as Thomas referenced, being able to cross-section data is really helpful. This is the raw scan data. It's colorized as well, but I just love the look of point data. And the next step clearly is making the data smart. This is the backbone. This could be considered the skeleton of a massive data set that then could be tagged and made a little bit more sophisticated than just raw points. In terms of the comprehensive nature of the data, the scanning went all the way from below. Literally, if you could look at the bottom of your screen, there's a trench that I was able to bring the scanner all the way down to. That's the lowest point of the North Tower, the foundation. And then by combining all the scans to the top of the tower, we're able to determine within, I think, high accuracy, the actual span of the tower. Now, hopefully this works. Sometimes Zoom doesn't like animations. And is it going to do it? No, it's not. Sorry about that. So the scan data, this is the raw data with just the imagery applied. So you're picking up a tremendous amount of detail, and this is comprehensive throughout the entire building, this level of data. And you're even picking up in the scan data, the pigeon mesh on the sculptures, but then taking it into other software programs where you could mesh the data. And what I've discovered or found is that when you combine the scan data with photogrammetry, it works exceptionally well. The processing seems to improve, and the return is amazing. So this is a 3D model. This isn't a photograph of the entryway. And what I think is amazing is you're picking up the patina of the brass on the doorways, and you clearly see the sculptures and the individual sculptures. So some of the data that may have been missed by the scan data can then get supplemented by the photogrammetric data. And again, just showing, you can see a few, just to show that it isn't a photograph. If you notice at the top of the sculptures on the right-hand side, there is missing information there. And that is the end of my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Douglas. Indeed. Any questions from the participants? Could you please raise your hand so that I can allow you to talk? If not, then may I ask you something, Douglas? What about the preservation of the data? What about all this, what we discussed up to now, so far as the methodologies presented by Rafaela, or this, what Thomas mentioned about metadata, paradata, and so on? Can you please take a position to that?
The building, the initial purpose of the project was to explore how much work could be done in a relatively short period of time, and then it exploded into, let's see how difficult it is to scan a Gothic cathedral like Cologne. The post-processing data was done in stages, so that the original data, like many projects, was copied and then set aside. There are 6 copies of the original data, comprehensive data. So that's helpful in terms of protection. I believe 1 copy is on a cloud. One of the problems we had with a project this size is that, just understanding the volume of data that you generate, not necessarily from the original data, but then obviously the post-processing. The first step in the data development was converting the proprietary ZNF data and the Leica Cyclone registration data into open source as best as possible. And as I mentioned, having converting the data into E57, and also having both TIFF and a JPEG imagery. And then the next steps is taking it into Revit, and the cathedral also has a particular software for stone conservation that they use, and production planning. And so the further development will be then staging the data. Also, this is the starting point, and then further work can be done with the scan data at various steps. Right now, there isn't a piece of software that can provide, say, showing the evolution of the data, or there are software methods of doing, say, monitoring of the building and incorporating that, or structural analysis. But it's always derivatives of the original data. So, or at least that's what they've been using.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Anybody else to ask something?
Yeah, Marinos, I'd like to ask a question.
Please, Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, so hi, Douglas. I have a question, but actually came up with another question as a follow-up of what Marinos was asking. So you mentioned that the project is not done yet, so that there will still be data acquired, if I understood correctly. But do you know what they currently use the data for at this moment? Do they use it for conservation purposes? Have they used it for, I don't know, virtual exhibitions or anything of the kind? Or are they waiting until the project is complete?
Well, let me just say the project will never be complete. Similar to the scaffolding that you see on the towers, the idea is that it is, it's a recording. It started as a recording project, so it will be then as necessary. Areas can be redocumented depending upon the nature of their work. So it was never intended to be a one-off project, and it is supposed to carry forward over time. I would say that it's being used entirely for conservation and architectural purposes at this point, not public engagement. What is interesting is that there are a number of models that exist currently of the cathedral online that are remarkably accurate, or at least visually accurate. And as you know, that seeing a building online, you're not really measuring it or interrogating it. You're not concerned about the survey quality. So the visual component is kind of the important aspect, not the dimensional component. For most situations, not all situations.
All right, and then maybe a very quick question. So I understood that the 3D laser scanning data is the basis of the data acquisition process, but did you use the 360-degree imagery for color information, or did the scanners already capture color?
The scanner, the scanner operates in that it scans first, and then it does the 360-degree imagery. So that brings it in together, and that colorizes the point data. You saw in the presentation, there are 360-degree images that you can use. We've done that in the past, where we've done like walkthroughs of the building just using 360 imagery. But what I found in this project is that the best method was combining the scan data with photogrammetry. So taking high-res photos around the building and incorporating that into the scan data through another software stage. And the result is that you get the 3D mesh, which you saw with the kind of black and white models, and then the imagery over top of it. It's beautiful stuff. It's just very, very heavy in terms of geometry.
All right, thanks, Douglas.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks, Douglas. And we are moving now to, sorry, Rocco, yes, I apologize.
Thank you. Just a very short question. You nicely mentioned that every pillar in cathedral has a story. How can you include this story in documentation? Do you have some idea?
Not at this point, no. And that hasn't been my entire focus. With Revit, you could do a fair bit of annotation, but not to the extent that I think is necessary. There may be something out there, you may be familiar with something, but that is ideally what we want, so that from my side, one of the issues that I have with Revit and the post-processing of scan data is that you're post-processing it. Or if you're using Revit, you have a modeler reinterpret the data. And ideally, what I'd like to see is an annotation system that you can use on the scan data, so that you could tag a column and create a narrative, be it a maintenance issue or the story behind that column, but with the raw data that is been not modified by a modeler. Ideally, that's what I would like to see, and that doesn't really exist in software like Cyclone or Laser Control.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
No, go.
I will try to refer to this issue in my presentation. Thank you.
Yes, and not only, please be patient and wait until the presentation of Rob Davis comes. You will hear about crowdsourcing. Yeah? data which are not available locally, you can find them today globally. Any other questions or remarks from our participants, attendees? No?